is Caitlin Glastonbury.
My name is Gerard D. August Jr., or the third.
My name is Loviers.
My name is Kirill Gill.
And I use they, them, and she, her pronouns.
My pronoun is they, them, their.
And I use they, she, etc. pronouns.
And I use any pronouns that feel good to you.
So the first thing I really do is to point out this distinction between sex and gender, right? Like biological sex and gender, and really talk about gender as a social and cultural construct, right? A set of ideas, a set of characteristics and social positions that folks have associated with sex, right? With biological sex, with being either male or female. Anyone falling outside of gender binary can fall under that trans umbrella. Unfortunately, what has happened over time and what still happens to a strong degree today, both within the trans community and without, is the association with transgender only meaning a transsexual, someone who has who aligns with a gender binary. But that's just one version. Understanding of trans only being about a binary is really problematic in a lot of ways. It creates divisions within the trans community, and also it creates the invisibility of gender expansive folks who fall outside of that binary.
I think to me, the term non-binary and the term queer feel very comfortable because there aren't really boundaries to what that can mean. The thing that I don't always appreciate about the words like man or woman is that they put you in a box. And I think what's so beautiful about that queer identity is that I don't have to try and fit into any standard. In middle school, I really started to become aware of it. That was when I saw a lot of my peers, a lot of girls the same age, start wearing makeup and start, loving to talk about boys and loving to dress up on certain days. And I played along with it because I felt like I had to, but it never felt right, It always felt like I was watching another group of people naturally understand how to do these things that they did because they were girls and that's what girls did. The idea of, that a woman has to act a certain way and be polite and sit a certain way and speak a certain way has always stood out to me because I don't feel like that's something that I've ever wanted to do or to be. Yeah, I think they, them pronouns were not necessarily introduced to me in the healthiest way because they were brought up more in a mocking way. And so I didn't necessarily feel comfortable identifying with them because I hadn't seen them in a positive connotation. I think that's one of the biggest aids in people feeling comfortable in themselves is seeing other people who can do that and who can be comfortable in themselves and be happy in themselves. Two of the biggest factors in me coming out was meeting a non-binary queer person at Ithaca College who talked to me about music and their experiences in the professional musical world as a queer person. And it was also hearing a friend of mine give a poem at a pride rally about queer identities being unapologetic and being beautiful. And those two people are probably the reason that I finally accepted that I wanted to come out. Around the same time I was realizing that gender was a thing in middle school was when I realized that I was bisexual. And so I had been comfortably out and something other than straight with friends and with my family since then. And then to have to take it one step further and have a second coming out experience of, hey, I'm also not cisgender was definitely an experience that I had. At this point, I love the word queer. I love that it's an umbrella term and it doesn't really have to mean anything in particular. And so coming out on the daily basis that I do at this point has become easier because I can just throw it out there of oh yeah, I'm queer.
We use they, them all the time to describe people that we're not sure, right? When we're like, oh, someone lost their wallet at the park. I hope they're able to find it. It's just recently when we've come to associate that language with particular identities that people start to feel uncomfortable. And that says more about people's understandings of gender as a binary than it does of their ability to think about their language a little bit more carefully.
If someone gets married, everyone congratulates them by saying, "Oh, congratulations, Mrs.," and then using their husband's last name. Even if they don't want to change their name, it's assumed that, yay, we now refer to this person by a new term because of this big change in their life. And yet when someone comes out and introduces a new set of pronouns, it's seen as being too hard. If you think about it, that's one of the most heartbreaking things there is about this, because it's, it's the world telling you that recognizing the truest part of your identity is too much work.
When I was younger, it was like early 90s and all that stuff. Pronouns we've heard was he, him, his, she, her, hers, and they, them, their. But they, them, their was never really used as in a form as a pronoun, or at least it wasn't advertised in the educational system as such. I was a kid who was raised in a household where it was like hand-me-downs. I would wear my older sister's clothes and my older brother's clothes and so on and so on. So it's like, it's not a big deal.
There's actually some really interesting studies that show that little kids in preschool at like age 3 will be playing, and they'll play with toys in ways that aren't gender specific.
Again, as a child who grew up with hand-me-downs, whatever toy was available, I played with it.
But like just a year goes by, right? They come in as 4th graders, and when their parents start highly gendering their dress and highly gendering the way they speak to them and the way they engage with them, those kids suddenly are like, nope, dress up is for girls. Playing with trucks and whatnot are for boys, right?
So I was fighting the times of trying to find where I stood on the linear pathway while also acknowledging that there was no such thing as a linear pathway. I kept everything to myself and just said, well, if anyone ever asks me, I'll tell them, but no one ever asked me, they just always assume. I just told people at times like to refer to me as it, not as in it in a derogatory sense or anything, but like I'm my own entity. I would say there's many factors that take a role when it comes towards people of color, when it comes to the idea of gender binary or non-binary or gender expression. And that's one of those moments where we gotta also remind people like not everyone who says these things or have these beliefs are people who have ill intentions. My grandfather never minded when I used to kiss him on the cheek, especially as a young child, because like it was expected as a form of like a greeting. And no one ever stopped me. They were very rude, like my mom's side of the family, and they were like, oh, Sage avec Junior, liun massisit. So that refers to like, hey, what's wrong with Junior? Is he like a homosexual?
One of the biggest, I think, negatives that we see and that I try to talk to my students a lot about is that ideas around masculinity, right? Particularly like hardcore, this is what it means to be a man. Those characteristics are oftentimes really toxic, hence toxic masculinity, right? This idea that you must be tough all the time, you can't cry, you can't have strong emotions. That's damaging. We know that's damaging to boys and men.
Imagine I come to you, right? And I stepped on your toes. I stepped on your toes by accident, like, because I'm like walking by really quickly because I'm rushing out the door to go to school. Even if I say sorry, that pain that you're feeling is still there. You're going to work, and the next door neighbor is pulling out their can of garbage, and the wheels run over the same foot. He apologizes, he says sorry and everything, and you're like, oh, yeah, it's fine, it's cool. You're rushing to work, you get to work. Now you get to work, and you stub your foot on the door of your job. I'm telling you all these scenarios and all these possibilities because that's what people who use their pronouns or what people who identify in what we consider a different sexual orientation or a different gender expression orientation, that's what they go through on a constant basis, and it gets tiresome.
I started questioning it probably about 4 months ago, and then was like, I'll try it out. Yeah, it was like, yeah, that sounds more right. But for me, I don't feel a particular attachment to any pronouns. It was just in that moment recognizing that I no longer existed within the binary and that I never really existed in that binary. You know, I'm Middle Eastern, so that culture has a lot of men get the money, women are in the kitchen and making babies. What I believed I was feeling was a discontentment and disagreement with the way femininity and womanhood are treated in our culture, and then slowly started to realize that's an experience you really have to work through.
I actually think our more natural state is non-binary, right? Like gender is a social construction that is placed on us, and then we have to sort of jam ourselves into these like very specific ideas, and it doesn't fit well, right? Regardless of really your gender identities.
They is, you know, kind of more where I lean, but she is still comfortable. Like, it's like when you get like half points on a short answer question. It's like you're not fully right, but you're also not fully wrong. For me, it was coming to terms with the fact of I am doing this because I want to, and not because I feel like I owe anybody that. But, you know, wanting my parents to understand there's a reframed version of, you know, this imagined future that they've had for their kid. They're never going to learn, and they're going to be less willing to learn until it's someone that they love. And, you know, I watched their responses growing up to my childhood friends coming out, and I was like, I don't really need that in my life right now. And so my formative experience with that is this is not something my parents accept. And like I said, because she is still comfortable for me, it's not something I feel they need to know right now. And I'm still figuring out all of what that means for me. I've spent a lot of my life hating my body and treating it like garbage, and hating myself and treating myself like garbage. And part of that was because I did not fit this idea of woman, because it never felt right. And I thought, if I just keep doing these things, right? If I do this and maybe this and this and this and this, maybe then I will feel like a woman. And it's like, I look at myself now and I'm like, nice. Because I don't look like the ideal female's body, one, because it's not real, and two, because it's not a woman's body. It's kind of like meeting yourself for the first time. It's like, no, I kind of like this person because this person's happier.
I don't think I really identify with any gender because I don't think that anyone should be confined to any role. I'm not a man nor am I a woman because I do what I wish to do, and those labels were created to confine. I like to think that I was outside of those confines pretty early in life. I just kind of thought about it, and I realized that the weight of those terms, man, woman, whatnot, held no bearing in my life. I remember being a little kid and playing with Barbies, and then building cities out of blocks. It was I did both, and it wasn't for a while, maybe like third grade, where this kind of became relevant. And so for a little while, I did really go with the like, oh, I'm, you know, embarrassed that I like playing with dolls or whatnot. And so I kind of like shut that out for a few years, because I was bullied at a really young age. I wasn't uncomfortable with stuff, and so people almost needed to make me feel uncomfortable with myself.
I think that we have a lot of people walking around feeling really uncomfortable in their bodies and in their lives, and in the expectations that their parents and friends and partners and teachers have placed on them.
I learned about the transgender community at about the age of 12. And maybe the next 4 years of my life after that, I just became respectful of what people wanted to be identified as. And then around the age of like 16 or so, I remember when people asked my pronouns, I'd go like he, him, his, or whatever boats your float was my direct response to them. I think I kind of began identifying as gender irrelevant at that point of like, this is something that doesn't affect me. I feel for most people, they stick with he, him, his, because I am male appearing. And I don't really blame people for that. A person who is just kind of generally unkind to the thought of being transgender in some format is where the problem really comes in. I have this advantage of being somebody who is usually referred to as, oh, Kirill, he, and appearing as a stereotypical man would. So the people who aren't respectful to trans people, they look at me and they go like, oh yeah, that's a guy, but it's never brought up in conversation. In a way, I'm lucky that the gender I identify with doesn't cause problems. There shouldn't be certain trans people that get it harder than others. I look for that world where nobody looks at anybody differently. Equal chance of representation is the thing that's most important to me. And I think over time bias is dissolving more and more. I think it's probably going to matter when our generation is the one who's mostly in the workforce that I think it's going to become more even. Because like I said, it's the knowledgeable want to be respectful. So part of me is almost like thinking a waiting game, but also part of me is just like, it doesn't take any effort to be respectful. just do it.
To be a good ally, listen, right? Listen to folks. There are so many people who are more than willing to share their experiences.
Part of me appreciates when people ask questions, especially when I think they're sincere.
We're people. We're not always going to see eye to eye on something. We're not always going to be able to relate to the person next to us.
When someone tells you who they are, listen.
You have to want to be an ally. You don't have to succeed immediately. You'll get there if you keep trying.
Whether you think you are ready to come out or not, then just getting personal with it with yourself and, not being afraid to admit to yourself that something, big and scary like this could be true. And taking it slow if you need to.
For that individual, the advice I would tell them is flat out, don't rush yourself. Don't rush yourself for other people, especially. If you feel like you're rushing yourself, then you're not giving yourself the due time that you deserve, because you should, it's not that you should, but you deserve to be happy.
You'll get there. It's a journey. You are a person, first and foremost.
The importance is your own comfort, the thing that makes you feel happy in your own skin. And so do what you want. There are people who will respect you. That's just the truth.